You put all that in a book, and the book is White Religion, Black Humanity. Now, all of your books, I'm familiar with Cone, and I've read Cone. So as I looked at Singleton, Cone was okay, but at the same time, what grabbed my attention was what the brother talking about when he talks about white religion and black humanity. So, one question, two parts. Why this book? Why this book? We talk about liberation theology, and as we go through, we will see more of how you deal with it. But why this book that talks about oppressed black folk, that talks about the divine nature and how it's manifested in black folk, and how we get to the point of accepting this Christian faith that we wholeheartedly embrace, right? And you do it in an interesting kind of way. So why this book? And then why the title? White Religion and Black Humanity.
Well, pursuant to what I said in the previous response, this book is my second book.
Okay.
And generally with theologians, usually their first book is their dissertation. It's a suited up presentation of their dissertation, and that was the case with me as well, no different.
Okay.
My first book, Black Theology and Ideology, dealt mainly with the theological methods of James Cone and Juan Luis Segundo, and that I combined those methods with James Cone's Black Theology of Liberation and Juan Luis Segundo, Latin American theologian's Liberation of Theology, which was his magnum opus, or the book for which he was most famous. And Segundo argued in that book that before theology could become a liberating force for oppressed people, it must itself be first liberated from centuries of mistreatment in the justification of colonial context, rather than establishing the liberation motif as the cornerstone of Christian theology. And so, as I move into my second book, this is my signature book. This is the book that, if not my magnum opus, or the one in which you're most well known for, it was my introduction to the world, the theological world, the historical world, the black community, the church community, as to what Harry Singleton was going to be principally about theologically.
Okay.
And so in merging these two methods, which still serve really as the cornerstone of the way I funnel theological assertions for their authenticity or lack thereof, I decided to examine phenomenologically and historically the reality of black humanity. What is meant by black humanity? And why is black humanity such an important issue in particularly this context in American life? And of course, once we recognize that colonial life in America began with the enslavement of black people for cheap labor, that it began what I call not just a racial struggle for freedom, but a theological struggle for God. And so I wanted to show the significance of black humanity that became the point of origin of this tug-of-war theologically that would begin between white religious leaders and their treatment of black humanity. And then as we began to develop a black prophetic radical tradition, black leaders and their theological understanding of black humanity. So the common denominator in colonial life in America has been black humanity. What do we make of it? White Christian leaders trying to engage in an approach to Christian theology that debased black humanity so that they might be better exploited for cheap labor. the black prophetic tradition is going to theologize in such a way about black humanity that this is not what they were made for by God, but that they were made to share the resources of the earth and be free human beings as God created them from creation itself. And so black humanity for me was central in establishing my theological method. And so I wanted to show in this book, my signature statement, how white Christian values shape black humanity and form the basis by which not only black people had to respond pragmatically, but how black people had to respond theologically to centuries of being taught this debased understanding of their humanity, not just in the name of white folk, but in the name of God. And of course, the corollary to that is the establishment of white humanity as being superior. And so you can't establish a superior humanity for yourself unless you find another people to claim as inferior. And so in that sense, I wanted to show how this relationship became this, proverbial Gordian knot for not only black people personally, but for black thinkers as we try to affirm our humanity in a society that has been saying from 1619 that we're not human beings, or if we are, we're not human beings on the level of white people. Okay. That had to be dealt with for me, not only socially, economically, and politically, not only sociologically and economically, but it also had to be dealt with theologically as well, precisely because white Christian values debase black humanity as a standard and normative way of viewing black humanity and viewing it in the name of God. And in doing so, it created a tremendous struggle theologically with slaves relative to how they intuited their humanity over and against what they heard about their humanity every week. And so I wanted to put these two phenomena in relationship to show how they form the cornerstone of an emergent black theology that began in plantation life, but became formally expressed in the 1960s. So it is with these two phenomena of white religion, particularly white religious values relative to black humanity, and the phenomenon of black humanity itself that guided me in this particular book.
Okay, all right, and hoping, because we'd love to as we talk and dig in a little deeper in a few minutes, we'd love to look deeper into well, I'm going to phrase it for you in a few seconds. Let's for a moment. You have an interesting cover with a black face. I guess I need, and the cross. What is it about the cover of this design? What's up with that?
Well, you see the silhouette of a black head with a cross seared into it. And I was inspired by this image in terms of what I was trying to establish with this work, to show the depths in which white Christian values had been ingrained in the minds of black people, either to constantly reject them, to accept them, or as a constantly internal struggle, that we cannot get around defining who we are as human beings without dealing with white Christian understandings of our enslavement being divinely engineered and divinely ordained. It's not something that was done according to them as a mean-spirited activity just to exploit cheap labor, but that they were actually guided and inspired by the hand of God's self to enslave Africans, to expose them to civilization, a civilization that they would not have gotten in Africa because Africa was considered the dark continent. And so you're dealing with an erroneous historical presupposition, and you're also dealing with an absolutely porous and sophomoric understanding of Christian faith in the process of devaluing a group of human beings because they have a darker skin pigmentation than you. And so my inspiration for this image came from a book that had a tremendous impact on me. And it's a classic in black literature. It's called The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter Woodson. One of my favorite reads. And of course, if you can recall the cover of that book, there was the image of a woman with a band tied around her head with a lock on it. And so with this work and being inspired by Woodson, I don't think that Woodson in that work went far enough in talking about the theological miseducation of the Negro.
Okay.
And so in many ways, this book is my way of examining and exploring the theological miseducation of the Negro or of black people, where I could devote an entire work and develop it beyond where Woodson did it in Miseducation of the Negro. And so I drew my inspiration not only relative to the content from the Miseducation of the Negro of this book, but also the image of the Miseducation of the Negro as well.
Okay, and that's quite interesting, because I will agree, and especially after your read, also followed your book with starting from the beginning. Forget the exact title, by Ibram Kendi, not a theologian, historian, and dealing in the area of racism and racist thoughts. So understanding that is a place that we must needs go. And I like to kind of kick it off, and probably, if we can sort of some degree separate them out, and at some point it's going to be kind of hard, right? When we talk about what folk do to others, it's sort of hard to pull them apart, but let's see what we can do.